Well, hello, I'm Josh, and Merry Christmas! I'm back with a very special Christmas film, and really just one of my favorite films in general. I am, of course, talking about Frank Capra's 1946 film, It's a Wonderful Life. The story follows George Bailey, a man who has big hopes and aspires to travel abroad and live a famous and grand life as an architect. However, we see through the story that his dreams are crushed over and over, and he ends up working in the same bank that his father worked at while living in the same town that he's been in his whole life. And so, through a series of events, he ends up standing on a bridge on Christmas Eve ready to jump. All until an angel named Clarence comes and shows him the impact that he has had on his friends and family, and really the whole town of Bedford Falls.
Strange, isn't it? Each man's life touches so many other lives. And when he isn't around, he leaves an awful hole, doesn't he?
The story for It's a Wonderful Life originated from a short story written by Philip Van Doren Stern, and it was called The Greatest Gift. And after difficulties finding a publisher for the story, he printed up about 200 copies and sent them out to his friends and family as greeting cards. And a few years later, RKO Studios bought the rights to make a film out of it, originally planned to star Cary Grant. Frank Capra, who had just come back to Hollywood after producing several documentaries and training videos for the military, was very attracted to the story. From there, Jimmy Stewart, who had also recently returned from fighting in World War II, got attached to the film. And so both were pretty attracted to the story and the message behind it. And one thing I love about this film is just how enjoyable and easy to watch it is. You know, many times with older films, there can be aspects of it like the pacing or the acting that can be harder to get into for modern audiences. But despite being 74 years old, this film holds up incredibly well. Of course, the main reason for this is likely the story, which resonates with pretty much everyone who watches it. But I've noticed over the years that on a technical side, this film is pretty innovative as well, using a number of tricks that didn't become popularized in film for a few more decades. For instance, the use of freeze frames as emphasis.
What'd you stop it for?
Now, this particular use in the shop is meant to be funny, as you can hear the angel Clarence asking the other angel why they stopped it. And since then, we've had directors like Jean-Luc Godard or, more famously, Martin Scorsese, who have used this technique enough that nowadays it's not that uncommon of a thing to see.
As far back as I can remember, I always wanted to be a gangster.
But if you look at a lot of Hollywood films in the 40s, you would see that this would have been a very uncommon thing for any kind of film to do, to essentially remind the audience that they're watching a film. In fact, the common practice at the time was directly against this, with the concept of invisible editing. And through this, editors would try to mask the cuts by using motion, and so when you watch it, you don't think that it's cutting multiple times. Your mind just follows along with the motion. And so because of this, you're never taken out of the experience. Capra was known for being able to create great environments for actors, and each of the characters in this film is just so distinct and memorable that it makes you feel like this is an actual town. There are so many subtle jokes and things that you can pick up in later watches that are conveyed completely through the physical performances. And Capra would apparently spend lots of time giving everyone in the scene notes on what their characters would be doing. And this was not only for the people with speaking roles, but also for all the extras as well. And so a lot of the scenes where they're downtown or just with bigger crowds, you can really sense this realism in the fact that everyone's just not repeating some random task that they've been given in the background. The main stars of the film are, of course, Jimmy Stewart and Donna Reed, and as I mentioned before, they are truly incredible. Jimmy Stewart really goes to new levels with this film, and despite the many great performances that he's given throughout his career, I think it's pretty safe to say this one is his best. Lionel Barrymore is also great as Mr. Potter, the mean old rival to the Bailey building and loan. And like most of the actors in this film, despite how many other films I've seen him in, I always think to myself, oh look, there's Mr. Potter. Or like with Ward Bond, oh look, there's Bert. Even though he's given great performances in literally dozens of the greatest films of all time. Everyone just comes alive and the characters are so fleshed out. And if you look closely, you can even notice that alfalfa actor Carl Switzer has made it into this film as well as the prankster that opens the pool during the high school dance. I mean, that's pretty impressive to have cameos in two of the biggest Christmas films ever. In Frank Capra's autobiography, The Name Above the Title, Capra states that It's a Wonderful Life is his favorite of all the films he's made.
In a sense, it epitomizes everything I'd been trying to do and trying to say in the other films, only does it very dramatically with a very unique story. The importance of the individual is the theme that it tells, and that no man is a failure, and every man has something to do with his life. If he's born to do something.
But despite this, it was not a huge film at the box office, and it was largely overshadowed by the William Wyler film The Best Years of Our Lives, which followed soldiers returning back from World War II. Obviously, that was a very important film as well, especially at the time as it was 1946, and so many soldiers had just come back from World War II themselves. However, sadly, this lack of success for It's a Wonderful Life led to the end of Liberty Studios, which was a production company that Frank Capra started along with William Wyler and George Stevens. And furthermore, the licensing was not renewed and the film went into the public domain. Now, this may seem like a horrible thing, and in a lot of ways it is. I mean, obviously the filmmaker doesn't get any money for all his work, but in some cases, if the film's good enough, it can also mean endless promotion. If you remember back in October, I mentioned that a lot of the popularity for Night of the Living Dead came from the TV and smaller theatrical showings in the 70s and 80s, as theaters and TV stations did not have to pay anybody to show the film. Well, as you can probably guess, a very similar thing happened to It's a Wonderful Life during Christmas time. And before you knew it, it was a classic that everyone was talking about. It even got a controversial colorization of it back in the 80s when studios were colorizing a lot of older black and white films. It's good in a sense because they were trying to bring in younger audiences who had a lower tolerance for black and white films, and in doing so introduce them to a lot of the classics. But personally, I don't know. I prefer the black and white version. That's really how the film was made and it was intended to look the way it does. And besides that, the cinematography looks beautiful in black and white. It's incredible to think that the film was shot in July during a 100-degree heat wave of all things. And furthermore, I think the black and white helped disguise the fact that this was not a snowy Christmas Eve, but instead was a very hot and sunny summer day. I also love how when Clarence grants George's wish to see the world as if he had never been born, the town of Bedford Falls goes from what feels more like a Norman Rockwell painting to a city you'd see more commonly in a classic noir film, with electric lights and signs and tons of heavy shadows. One of my favorite moments from this part of the film is when they are in George Bailey's home, now run down, and as the car headlight shines into the house kind of as a spotlight, you can see the silhouette of Bert the policeman in the doorway. And it gives the characters this great backlight with a bit of a lens flare that is straight out of films like The Third Man and The Big Combo. So as we know, It's a Wonderful Life is a very popular film. It's referenced everywhere from Batman to Sesame Street, and it ranks 20th on the American Film Institute's Top 100 Films list. And I know with a lot of films, if you hype it up too much, saying it's the greatest film of all time or something, people tend to try and prove you wrong and just nitpick it or something like that. But I think with this film, it's just so genuine and with a strong message that just resonates with everyone, that I think it's kind of hard to do that with this one.
Because it's a theme that hits everybody. Everybody has gone through that thing when they practically rather die than live. So that's why I think that the big picture will live on beyond our time.
Attaboy, Clarence.
if you like to watch It's a Wonderful Life, it's available for streaming on Amazon Prime. You can see the black and white, or they also have the color version if you want to see it that way. And it's also on the other major streaming sites as well as a rent or buy option. And physically, this is another one you can get pretty much everywhere, especially this time of year. And of course, it still has pretty regular showings on TV, along with some theatrical showings as well. So check your local theaters and stations if you want to watch it that way. But anyways, now is time for the comment question. And I'm wondering, what is your favorite classic film? I know that's a pretty broad question, and nowadays people are including even 80s films in the classic film category, so I'm limiting this to pre-1960s. You know, like what you think of as classic Hollywood. I would have asked classic Christmas films, but I already kind of did that last week, so I don't know, maybe if your favorite classic film is also a Christmas film like It's a Wonderful Life, then that really works out. But anyways, list your favorites in the comments section below and start discussing. Have a great rest of your day, and remember to keep watching movies. I'll see you next week.
Where's Mary? Where's my kids? Watch him, Bert. Ernie, what's the matter with you two guys? You were here on my wedding night. You both of you stood out there on the porch and sung to us. Don't you remember?